Good morning. Good morning, and thank you so much for being able to join. It's an honor, indeed. I can't hear you. Yes.
I'm looking forward to it very
Thank you.
much. I just wasn't sure what time you started, so.
Yes, it was the proposal of our colleague, Dr. Marusca.
Yes, no, but our clocks went back on Saturday.
Yes,
So,
yes, indeed.
I didn't know whether yours did or not, so.
Yes. Once again, it was absolutely wonderful a couple of years ago, I think 3 years ago, when I discovered your Facebook group,
Oh,
a
yeah.
private Facebook group on Gaster legacy, family, and discussions. It was absolutely splendid.
Yes, and you're an enthusiastic member of the group. Most academics seem to be quite quiet on the subject, so we don't get so much feedback. But yes, well, let's see what happens. I don't understand what this other talk is. You said there's a full day talk coming up in November, but I don't know what that's about. It's supposed to.
I will send you the program I received yesterday from the PR of the Romanian Academy. It seems there is one meeting in within the premises of the Romanian Academy, the historical premises. Gaster visited while in Bucharest, and this will involve several noted scholars and public intellectuals from Felicia Waldman, who is Midnight Brit chief for Romania, and Professor Moshe Idel, the foremost expert in Hasidic cluster-wise Kabbalah things. Moshe Idel recently elected an honorary member of the Romanian Academy.
Okay, super.
I will send you the program for sure. It is only in Romanian, I am afraid.
Yes. Probably going to be rather hard to translate. I think Google Translate or whatever it is doesn't work very well for Romanian.
I am afraid, indeed. I am afraid. It's not particularly skillful in translating languages which are not which have several influences from Latin to Slavic languages. It's a bit awkward at times.
Well, perhaps you'll give us a little summary at some point.
Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, it's not really clear when or if or how they will publish such proceedings, because as you know, for instance, 2 years ago, we were in contact when they organized a panel on the most infamous anti-Semite Dr. Paulescu, and they switched to a celebration of Moses Gaster, but those discussions were not registered, they were not recorded. They were not recorded, they were not published or discussed beyond the walls of the Romanian Academy.
Oh, that's a shame. Really a pity, but
that's
anyway.
a shame indeed. Yes, indeed. We are still waiting for, I think, for Dr. Marusca to join us.
Okay.
I'm actually here.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
That's absolutely excellent to have you. We already started the recording. We can cut it from the moment when we will start. So, good morning, everybody. Very many thanks, first and foremost, to the two descendants from London of Moses Gaster's own family. I am very pleased, very honored, as my colleagues are, to have you today through this means in Bucharest. And of course, I would like to thank very much our colleague from London, Dr. Samuel Marusca. I would briefly introduce him, and then to our audience, because this seminar for the history of religions, organized by the Institute for the History of Religions, the 20th edition, is the first one we will conduct in English and have discussions in English. The preceding ones were only in Romanian. However, our public is rather international in nature. And I'm very much pleased to introduce now Dr. Samuel Marusca. He was born in communist Romania, where he finished a BA in English and an MA in theology. He did his postgraduate studies in linguistics at UCL, University College London, and finished a PhD in linguistics at SOAS, the famous imperial-born London School of Oriental and African Studies, where he worked as a teaching fellow and taught phonetics for a few years. His research mainly focuses on Romance languages and the role of prosody in spoken language, as well as the production and perception of speech and intonation. At the moment, he is writing, and this is the most important for us as an institute of scholars, he is writing a monograph about Moses Gaster and the Balfour Declaration, which is under contract with Palgrave Macmillan. His broader interests include moral philosophy, the consciousness, and secularization theory. He published a book about Puritan theologian John Owen and other articles in book chapters on linguistics. Currently, he furthermore works as a senior civil servant for the UK government. He is active, as some of us already know, in the Romanian diaspora community in the UK and works with various organizations to organize conferences in London, building bridges between the Romanian diaspora community and British institutions. He also runs a podcast called Practical Wisdom, which I recommend, which aims to enrich public discourse on Christianity by engaging in conversations with both secular and Christian thinkers. I may mention for the secular thinkers even names like Noam Chomsky. So, Dr. Samuel Marusca, you are very much welcome to our institute. And please let us know what would you like to offer us today.
Good morning, everyone. And first and foremost, thank you very much, Dr. Eugen Ciurtin, for your kind invitation to join this session today. And also, I'd like to congratulate you on all of the good work that you do at the Institute. And I'm really happy to join you today and see some of the descendants of the Gaster family in the audience, including Ruth and Lucy. Thank you very much for joining us. And thanks very much for joining us to all those interested in Moses Gaster and in finding out a bit more about this huge historic figure in Romanian Jewry and in world Zionism. Moses Gaster is without a doubt a huge historic figure, and unfortunately, his activities in London are not very well known in Romanian history and historiography. So my talk is about Moses Gaster, the scholar, spiritual leader, and most importantly, Zionist visionary. Now, I'd like to focus more on the second part, but before I do that, I'd like to speak a little bit about Moses Gaster, the scholar and spiritual leader. So I'm going to share my screen, if I may. Moses Gaster was the chief rabbi of the UK, of the Sephardi community, a world expert on the Samaritans, a collector of 2,000 manuscripts, and scholar with about 45,000 books in his library at its peak. Gaster was not a man to be ignored in his lifetime. When he died, he left an archive of about 170,000 items, many of which are still being studied in universities in Britain and the United States. This research mainly draws from the archives at University College London. There are some archives in Romania as well, some of which burned during the fires of the 1989 revolution. There's another archive at Manchester University, British Library, and of course at University College London, which is where my research takes place. And my research is based on Gaster's papers and Gaster Zionist material at UCL. Moses Gaster contributed extensively to the study of Jewish and Romanian folklore by promoting folklore as a scholarly method for understanding Jewish history and culture. He was educated at the University of Bucharest. For those that may not be familiar with his Romanian years, and later at Breslau under figures like Gretz. He also finished his PhD at Leipzig University, where he discussed a sketch of the phonetics, the history of the phonetics of Romanian. His research, such as on Romanian and Talmudic legends, offered an alternative view to the mainstream German Jewish historiographical tradition, emphasizing folklore's role in reviving a collective Jewish memory. His contributions to folklore studies helped position Jewish culture as not only historical, but actively formative in shaping Jewish identity. He famously talked about Petre Ispirescu and Romanian folk tales, and he famously wrote about Petre Ispirescu and talked about the difference between fairy tales and legends. And I quote, Gaster said about Ispirescu, "Let us be permitted to make one observation to Mr. Ispirescu, namely, that legends are not the same as fairy tales, as he seems to understand the term, since he titles this collection, Legends or Fairy Tales of the Romanians. A legend is a story with a distinctively devout religious character tied to a particular personality, place, and time, reflecting the real world as it is. Meanwhile, a fairy tale has nothing to do with religious devotion. It is a story detached from personality, time, and place, and where the real world is reflected somewhat obliquely." Gaster's correspondence with Romanian scholars is well known, and this contributed to Romanian intellectual circles, where he was valued for his deep knowledge of folklore and historical text, and also Old Romanian. There is ample correspondence between Moses Gaster and Mihai Eminescu, who was a very close friend, Titu Maiorescu and the Junimea group, Ion Creangă, Nicolae Iorga, Tache Ionescu, and B.P.H. Deu, whom he considered one of the most able intellectuals in Romania. This correspondence has made the subject of several volumes. As we know, he was banished by the Brătianu government, by Sturza, in 1885, alongside a group of very influential Jews, such as Schechter and many others. And in 1885, after being exiled from Romania for his Zionist activities, there are many reasons, and his exile and the decision why he was exiled from Romania is hotly debated in Romania. But Gaster, after he was exiled, moved to London, initially to Paris, then to London, where he became the chief rabbi of the UK of the Sephardic Jewish community, and also a lecturer of Slavonic literature at Oxford. So I think he was probably the first one to speak Romanian at Oxford University and teach Romanian literature there. This tradition is now continued by Martin Maiden at the University of Oxford, who also teaches Romanian in the linguistics department. And of course, in London, we have the CIS at UCL, CIS department, where there's people can study Romanian as well. Unlike Central Europe, where folklore was an academic discipline, England's folklore scene was largely informal, dominated by lay enthusiasts and independent scholars. And so he served as president of the Folklore Society, and he argued for the cultural value of medieval Jewish texts, folklore, and mysticism, challenging the German academic view of Jewish history as rigidly medieval. His approach anticipated later scholarship revolutions in Jewish studies, such as Gershom Scholem's work on mysticism and Jakob Katz's historical analysis of Jewish law. Gaster's advocacy for folklore as a tool to reveal Jewish heritage brought fresh perspectives, laying groundwork for new Jewish historiography. Many of his publications were editions and studies of a wide range of texts, including European folklore, Jewish and Christian literature from antiquity to the Middle Ages. For example, we have the Literatura Română Populară, Crestomația Română, published in 1989, in 1891, Romanian Apocalypse of Abraham in 1887, Ilchester Lectures on Greco-Slavonic Literature from Oxford, Hebrew Visions of Hell and Paradise, The Sword of Moses, Chronicle of Jeremiah, and many others, including, for example, later books such as The Exemplar of the Rabbis, The Samaritans, Their History, Doctrines, and Literature, published in 1925, Asatir, the Samaritan Book of the Secrets of Moses, and Maase Book of Jewish Tales and Legends, and many more. Moses Gaster was in exile for 36 years. For 36 years, he spoke Romanian, corresponded with many Romanian figures and intellectuals from Romania, published in Romanian, and was still interested in what was happening in Romania, particularly in the Jewry from Romania. He visited Romania in 1921, 36 years after his exile, on a tour when he would give conferences that would last for 2 hours and travel by train and automobile, received with high honors, for example, at Iași, where he was received by the mayor of the city. The police prefect, Celibidache, was the father of renowned composer Sergiu Celibidache. Moses Gaster was also received by Goga, Minister of Religious Denominations at the time, and Nicolae Iorga. He was very well respected at the time, and he was received with high honors everywhere he went. Gaster was awarded the Order of the Crown of Romania in 1929 by King Michael of Romania. This prestigious award honored Gaster's extensive work in preserving and promoting Romanian folklore and culture, as well as his contributions to Jewish scholarship and his advocacy for Romanian-Jewish relations. Gaster's pioneering work in Romanian folklore was instrumental in advancing academic studies of Romanian heritage, making him one of the foremost scholars in the field. His connection with Romanian culture was deep-rooted, beginning with his early studies and publications on Romanian legends and folktales, and this honor served as formal recognition of his lifelong contributions to Romanian cultural identity and history. And this is the document from King Michael I, King of Romania. Central to Gaster's cultural Zionist ideology was his dedication to Hebrew revival. He saw language as a core element of Jewish unity and identity, and his support extended to early practical efforts in Palestine. And to this end, Maria Cioată has a very interesting paper about Moses Gaster and the Samaritan settlement, which is based on previously unpublished material, and Gaster's support for early Zionist settlements is well documented in his involvement with the Samaritan settlement. His collaboration with Friedrich Horn and the Romanian Jewish settlers showcased his commitment to practical Zionism, which combined cultural ideals with tangible settlements efforts. According to Maria Cioăta's research, Gaster's influence extended into facilitating settlements where Jewish immigrants could thrive culturally and economically, supporting the Hebrew language and education. The Samaritan settlement, established in 1882 in Palestine by Jewish immigrants from Romania, from the Bacău County, marked a pivotal early Zionist endeavor aimed at creating a sustainable Jewish community in the historic land of Israel. Led by Friedrich Horn, an Austrian-born schoolteacher who had moved to Romania, the settlers faced numerous challenges as they transitioned to agricultural life. This early settlement is unique in that it was largely independent, with limited support from larger Zionist organizations. Instead, it was backed by local Romanian societies and Moses Gaster, the prominent figure in the Zionist movement, who advocated for the settlement's vision of cultural and agricultural renewal. The settlement's early years were marked by hardships, including financial difficulties, challenging living conditions, and the need to build essential infrastructure, such as a synagogue and a school. Moses Gaster played an influential role by documenting and preserving records of Horn's experiences in Samaritan, recognizing the colony's potential to contribute to Jewish cultural revival through the use of Hebrew and Jewish traditions. Lord Rothschild later took over the settlement and renamed it Zichron Yaakov. Horn's initial leadership and Gaster's support underscored by broader commitment of Romanian Jews to practical Zionism, which combined religious dedication with settlement activities in Palestine. Gaster was also a religious and spiritual leader. He was appointed, as we know, as Chacham of the Sephardic community in Britain, and he took the role of guiding British Jews, promoting cultural integration while preserving Jewish identity. He founded the English Zionist Federation and became a prominent figure in Anglo-Judaic societies, many of them. Gaster's leadership fostered a cultural revival that emphasized Jewish spiritual values, merging traditional beliefs with modern Zionist aspiration. He was the spiritual leader of the Spanish and Portuguese Jewish community in London, and he was appointed to this role in 1887 and presided over the bicentenary of Bevis Marks Synagogue. He was also a principal at Judith Lady Montefiore College in Ramsgate. Coming up to the Balfour Declaration, the claim of this talk is that Moses Gaster played a crucial and essential role in securing the Balfour Declaration for the Jewish people. The Balfour Declaration laid the foundation for the State of Israel. It was issued in 1917 to support Britain's cause in World War I, at a time when Britain was losing the war and it needed allies to defeat Germany. The promise of a Jewish homeland in Palestine gained support from the Zionist movement, which was essential in bringing the US into the war against Germany. This declaration was not initiated by the British government, but was a response to an appeal from Zionists, including Moses Gaster. The aim of the Balfour Declaration was for Britain to support the establishment of a national home, and I quote, "This is a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine." The terms home and Jewish people, it was initially race, were intentionally vague, serving as a compromise to gain approval from the Joint Committee on Foreign Affairs, although Zionists were not satisfied with anything less than a country in the historical lands of the Holy Land in Palestine, a region at a time under Ottoman occupation. That was under Ottoman occupation for 400 years. Britain aimed to maintain influence and control, as outlined in the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, for a future division of the Ottoman Empire. This agreed-upon declaration, a single sentence of only 67 words, was sent by Lord Balfour, Foreign Secretary, in a letter to Lord Rothschild on November 2nd, 1917, to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain. The declaration contains 4 clauses, the first 2 promising to support, quote, "the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, followed by civil rights and existing non-Jewish Palestinian communities, and also the rights and political status of Jews in other countries." It is important to note that the phrase "national home for the Jewish people" versus "a Jewish state," indicating that it would normally be a national home in Palestine rather than Palestine itself. The civil and religious rights of non-Jewish communities in Palestine were also emphasized, although there were around 700,000, and estimates differ significantly. Some estimates say that there are around 700,000 Arabs in Palestine, and only about 10–11%, 70–80,000 Jewish population in Palestine. So the majority in Palestine was already non-Jewish. The leader of the Zionist organization, Theodor Herzl, entertained the idea of the Uganda scheme. This scheme was previously offered by the British government to provide a safe refuge, a safe haven for the Jewish people in Uganda. We need to remember that in 1903, after the Chisinau pogrom, when dozens were killed and thousands were displaced and thousands of Jewish homes were burnt, this was a huge tragedy. Unfortunately, there were going to be many more tragedies after that during the Second World War, but this was a huge tragedy, and alongside other pogroms and atrocities committed in the Russia and Romania and Eastern Europe in more broader terms, the British government decided to agree on the Uganda scheme and told the Zionist leaders, "We can give you Uganda as a safe haven, as a temporary measure, before eventually potentially looking for other options." And initially, Theodor Herzl was the leader of the World Zionist movement, considered this scheme. Theodor Herzl was a prominent Austro-Hungarian journalist. He was a playwright and political activist, best known as the founder of modern political Zionism. He played a crucial role in promoting the idea of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine and convened the first Zionist Congress in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland, which marked a significant moment in the Zionist movement. Theodor Herzl came to London and wanted to meet the Jewish Zionist leaders. He spoke to a British official, Herbert Samuel, and Herbert was good friends with Moses Gaster. Their wives were also in very good terms. And he recommended that Theodor Herzl meet Moses Gaster. And that's how they met. The two great Zionist leaders met in London and talked about the Zionist Congress and the Uganda scheme. He was introduced to Gaster in London, where they had meetings and further corresponded extensively in German. In 1903, after being offered the Uganda scheme, Herzl hesitated, considering Uganda an acceptable temporary solution. However, Gaster opposed the idea, arguing that Zionism was not political ideology, but a religious doctrine. According to James Renton in his book, The Zionist Masquerade, historians have misrepresented the Balfour Declaration as fulfilling the religious and historical ideals of the Zionists, when in fact the declaration was the result of Zionist propaganda and the political calculations and negotiations of the British Empire's government. The Zionist movement later laid the groundwork in 1917 for the British Mandate in Palestine. British policymakers were more concerned with Jewish propaganda, which in turn created pro-British propaganda in the US with the aim of winning the war. The English Zionist Federation, founded by Moses Gaster, relied on the support of the British government rather than that of immigrants from Great Britain. It has to be said that at the time in the United Kingdom, there were up to around 300,000 Jews living in England, and most historians agree that unlike Eastern Europe and Germany and other countries, the Jewish communities in Britain were thriving and were well respected and have been around for generations and were very prosperous. Now, the Zionist leaders wanted to convince the British government that all of the Jewish community supported and promoted Zionist ideals, which in fact wasn't the case. Many established Jewish communities and many families didn't entertain the idea of going back to the Holy Land in Palestine, in Ottoman Turkish occupied Palestine, in a barren land, in the desert, with no infrastructure, when they were living comfortably in the UK. So there are about 9,000, 10,000 members of the Zionist societies in early 20th century. But the Zionist leaders managed to convince the UK government at the time that all of the Jews in England wanted to return to Palestine. And this is how we've had so many British Zionist and Jewish federations and associations who had this purpose of relocating in Palestine, in the Holy Land. I also note that the main architects of the declaration, including Lord Balfour, Prime Minister David Lloyd George, American President Wilson, and many others, were all brought in Protestant evangelical tradition. And so they were promoting also Christian Zionism, which in their view was a fulfillment of the Isaiah prophecies in the Old Testament, whereas the Jewish people would return to the Holy Land. And so to this day, evangelicals have this affinity to Jewish culture and the Jewish people in more broader terms. Old New Land is a book, a utopian novel published by Theodor Herzl in 1902, talking about the future Jewish state. He also came to fame after publishing a manifesto, Der Jugendstaat. And following that, he became world famous and traveled the world. This novel was later, the Old New Land novel, was later translated into Hebrew by Sokolov as Tel Aviv. And later, Tel Aviv, the city of Tel Aviv, as we all know, bears the name of this famous novel. This provided inspiration for the Zionist movement. Who are the proponents or supporters of the Zionist movement, and more in particular, the Balfour Declaration? This is a photo of Chaim Weizmann. Key proponents, including Moses Hess, Leon Pinska, members of the Hovevei Zion movement, Nahum Sokolov, that I mentioned, Polish-born Zionist, author, journalist, later president of the World Zionist Congress. Sokolov later secured the support of Pope Benedict XV, so that of the Vatican in 1917, May of 1917, who described the return of the Jews to Palestine as providential. And he said that God willed it. Sokolov secured the assent of France in the Cambon letter of 4th of June 1917, and which was signed by Jules Cambon, the head of the political section of the French Foreign Ministry. Another supporter was Lord Walter Rothschild. The declaration is actually addressed to him, which is a little bit peculiar because he wasn't actually, as Moses Gaster, the de facto leader of the Zionist movement. Lord Rothschild instead was famous for being a zoologist. He had a famed zebra carriage, which was a cart driven by 4 zebras, which he drove to Buckingham Palace to demonstrate the tame character of zebras to the public. He was also a politician and a banker. He was a peer in the House of Lords, an inherited title in the House of Lords. Then Sir Mark Sykes, a prolific figure. He was a diplomat and an MP. Mark Sykes was introduced to Moses Gaster and Chaim Weizmann by Herbert Samuel. Herbert Samuel, he was the first nominally practicing Jew to serve as a cabinet minister and to become the leader of a major British political party, the leader of the Liberal Party. He was later the High Commissioner of Palestine. And then, of course, David Lloyd George was the Prime Minister at the time. Lord Balfour, who was Prime Minister previously, 1902 to 1905, and then Foreign Secretary. Max Nordau, Vladimir Jabotinsky, and many other Jewish leaders, Russian-born. We need to remember that even Chaim Weizmann was Russian-born. He worked very, very closely with Moses Gaster. Who are the opponents? There were many of them. Lord Curzon, the Chancellor, who was the Chancellor of the University of Oxford, and Marquis of Kedleston, conservative politician. Edwin Montagu, the only Jewish member in the British cabinet. Claude Montefiore, who was the British Jewish theologian and philanthropist. Leonard Cohen, another Jewish leader. Philip Mangus, British politician, and many more. A Zionist before Herzl. This is a saying attributed to Herbert Samuel. Of course, the idea of Zionism didn't come about with Theodor Herzl. The Jewish community in England and across the world wanted and had high aspirations and talked about these things for hundreds of years. But Moses Gaster, as the Hacham of the Sephardic community in Britain, was the founder of the English Zionist Federation and vice president of the Zionist Congress and the later leader of the Anglo-Jewish Association. He saw it more as a Jewish cultural revival than a purely political movement, as I mentioned. And it was significant that Gaster approached in the preliminary maneuvers leading to the issuance of the Balfour Declaration was to inspire British statesmen like Herbert Samuel and Mark Sykes with the glories of the Jewish heritage rather than lying out of a political program. Gaster recognized the pitfalls and dangers in the compromised wording of the Balfour Declaration and correctly depicted, and he predicted that it would eventually undermine Zionist claims and aspirations. Moses Gaster had a very close relationship with Herbert Samuel and negotiated with him as part of he was the part of the establishment of the British government to gain his support and convinced various cabinet ministers, including Lord Balfour, that the British government would greatly benefit from Zionist backing. Mark Sykes, asked Samuel to connect him with a Zionist leader that he could discuss with. And Samuel recommended Moses Gaster, whom he had admired for many years. It also helped that the first Zionist movement was approached. So this was the first time that a Zionist leader was approached by a government representative, not the other way around. This is an observation mentioned by Renton in his book. Interestingly, Gaster was so trusted that he had negotiations with Samuel, Sykes, and Picot. Gaster was a Zionist before Herzl, passionately invested in the cultural side of the Hebrew language, and Sir Sykes later said, following the Balfour Declaration, that he had met a man 2 years earlier who had been able to explain to him for the first time the true meaning of Zionism. This is from his famous speech at the Opera House in December of 1917. What are the milestones leading to the Balfour Declaration? First of all, in July of 1914, we have the outbreak of World War I that was going to reshape world politics, and the Zionists began negotiations with the British government. We also have the Arab Revolt that complicates things in 1916 and British policy towards the Zionist movement. The Arab Revolt is hotly debated in history, and as we know, it was spearheaded by Arab tribes, by the Arab royal family and army. There was also the British Army who was there. We have the British High Commissioner in Cairo who supported that, and there were a lot of negotiations with the British government and diplomats supporting the Arab Revolt and backing the Arab effort. We also have T.E. Lawrence, who is a very famous soldier who had a tribe of Bedouin people and soldiers fighting against the Ottoman Empire, trying to occupy and push back the Turks into Turkey and to occupy the Palestine territories. However, historians say that Lawrence of Arabia, as he is known, there's also a famous movie about him, didn't actually have more than 200, 250 Bedouin tribesmen with him at a time, and that they were light infantry with no heavy artillery, and their efforts were very, very small in the grand scheme of things in the Arab Revolt. At its peak, they had 500 troops, and they captured the port of Aqaba, which is a small port in Palestine. But otherwise, the Bedouin tribesmen were paid very handsomely in gold coins. So they didn't accept cash. They didn't want coins, money. They only wanted gold. And historians say that a Bedouin tribesman was perhaps paid more than a British marshal. And as we know, the Arab Revolt had a significant impact in the area, but it was the British Army that liberated Jerusalem later in December of 1917, and General Allenby dismounted from his horse and entered the Jaffa Gate at Jerusalem on foot as a sign of humility and showing modesty to the troops and to the Jewish people there. So it was the British Army that liberated Palestine and that pushed back the Ottoman Empire from the region with the help of the Arab armies. In December of 1916, David Lloyd George becomes Prime Minister and replaces Prime Minister Asquith and changes British foreign policy. Gaster is the one to write the first draft of His Majesty's government foreign policy on Palestine. In February of 1917, we have the most important meeting between the British government and the Zionist leaders. And this is the meeting that took place in Moses Gaster's home at 193 Maida Vale in London, Mitzpah, as he calls it, with Gaster presiding over the session. Attending were Moses Gaster, Lord Rothschild, Mark Sykes, Sir Herbert Samuel, James Rothschild, Nahum Sokolov, Chaim Weizmann, and others, 10 men in total. A plan of action for the following months was decided upon, aiming to win the sympathy and support of the French and Italian, the Vatican governments, as well as the American government. The Balfour Declaration was discussed and drafted for the first time at Moses Gaster's home during this meeting. This is a historic meeting, and I'm going to come back to this historic meeting of the 10 great men and Moses Gaster and what happened during that meeting later on, when I'm going to show you a document. Later on, in November of 1917, the War Cabinet approves the declaration and supports the Zionist cause. It has to be said, the British government was convinced that the Jewish Zionist leaders and the Jewish community was going to lobby in the United States and bring America into the war. The British government, under the influence of these leaders, including Moses Gaster, of course, sought to leverage the Balfour Declaration to bring the United States into the war. They argued that supporting the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine would secure American Jewish support for the war effort. And they actually succeeded in this, as America entered the war in April of 1917. There was a risk from German and Russian sympathies. The Zionist figures, including Herzl and Gaster, had German sympathies, until, that is, a bomb fell at Maida Vale, and Moses Gaster was very troubled by the bomb, and a few houses were severely damaged, and he decided to relocate and to move from his home in Maida Vale. But he had lots of German contacts. He studied in Germany. He studied at the seminary there. He did his PhD there. And this posed a risk to the British war effort. Other Zionist leaders came from Russia, as I mentioned, and had strong Bolshevik ties, supporting the Russian Revolution. This is, again, a very contentious point about Russia's stance on the Balfour Declaration. Initially, they thought that backing the declaration and the Zionist movement wouldn't support and wouldn't help in 1917 their revolution. But they later changed their stance on the Balfour Declaration and understood that it was good for Jewish communities from Russia to immigrate to Palestine. One of the points that the Jewish Zionist leaders made to the British government was the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was crucial for the British Empire, connecting the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, to the Indian Ocean. And they wanted safe passage to India, which is why the Zionist leaders said, we really want to have a British mandate, and we want to be to work with British government. What would happen if the British wouldn't be able to use the Suez Canal anymore? And so the British had an interest in the area and wanted to back the Zionist movement as a result. There were, however, multiple promises. And there's the McMahon correspondence. McMahon was a high commissioner in Cairo, in Egypt, who negotiated with the Hussein family, the Arab Hussein family, descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. So the Sharif of Mecca, he negotiated with the royal family and promised them, there is correspondence, letters between McMahon and the royal family, promising that if the Arab will support the British war effort in Palestine, eventually Palestine will be independent. However, the wording is very ambiguous, and there's a lot of debate in historic circles whether McMahon actually promised the Arabs independence in Palestine should should Great Britain win the war. So there's a hot debate around this. And we of course know that we had the Sykes-Picot Agreement between Mark Sykes and the British MP and diplomat, and Picot, his French counterpart, where they signed the secret agreement in May of 1916, in which the Middle East was divided in between two large spheres of influence, the French and the British side, and Palestine, most of Palestine, would fall under the British side sphere of influence. This is again a very hotly debated issue, and I have to say, one of the very most important documents that I've seen is the correspondence between Gaster and Mark Sykes, which suggests that Moses Gaster was actually not just aware of the agreement, but very much involved in meeting Picot at the French embassy, in meeting Mark Sykes, and actually negotiating with Picot. Picot favored Mark Sykes and thought that Moses Gaster was very conservative and was promoting Jewish Zionism and Zionist ideals. And for that reason, he wanted to speak to someone else, to another diplomat, which eventually happened, which is why at the meeting in February of 1917, Moses Gaster was actually sidelined and no longer played a crucial role in negotiating the declaration. Nahum Sokolov was selected to continue the negotiations with the British government and with Picot. So many historians argue that Great Britain made multiple promises. On the one hand, promising the Jewish Zionist leaders and Jewish communities a return in the Holy Land, to the Holy Land, by signing the secret agreement, Sykes-Picot Agreement 1916, which supports that, and the declaration, of course. And on the other hand, McMahon, the High Commissioner, British High Commissioner in Cairo, promised the Arab leaders independence in Palestine at the end of the war. And so this is a bone of contention for historians and politicians alike. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, after this historic meeting that I mentioned in 1917, James Rothschild replaced Gaster with Sokolov on the negotiation team, despite Gaster having negotiated with the British government for the previous 3 years, and appointed Chaim Weizmann as the new president of the English Zionist Federation, which frustrated Gaster. And this agreement, Mark Sykes was also present there, and this agreement was secretly signed in May of 1916 between the United Kingdom and France to define the proposed spheres of influences in the event that the Allies would win the war. This is again at a time when Britain was losing the war. The agreement allocated Britain control of areas roughly comprising of the coastal strip between the Mediterranean Sea and the River Jordan, southern Iraq, and an additional small area that including the ports of Haifa and Acre, now to allow access to the Mediterranean. France got control of southeastern Turkey, northern Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The agreement was seen by the Zionist movement as a positive step towards the creation of a Jewish homeland. Also, in this agreement, the Jewish population would receive a lot more than the current territory of Israel. But going back to the meeting at Maida Vale in 1917, this is a readout, a memorandum of the meeting held at Moses Gaster's house in February of 1917. And present, there were Moses Gaster in the chair and main government and Zionist leaders. This meeting this gathering included influential leaders who convened to discuss the implications of the Balfour Declaration amidst an ongoing turmoil of World War I and the impeding political changes in Russia. As the February Revolution in Russia unfolded, resulting later in the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, attendees recognized the opportunity to advocate for Jewish rights and aspirations in light of this shifting political landscape. During the meeting, participants deliberated on strategies to leverage the Balfour Declaration to promote the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. They expressed concern about the safety and rights of Jews in Eastern Europe, particularly given the rising anti-Semitism and uncertainty following the revolution. The discussion highlighted a desire to rally support within Britain and internationally, aiming to engage with the British government and other key stakeholders to secure backing for the Zionist cause. And I'd like to draw your attention to this sentence. After Moses Gaster says that he doesn't support a condominium in Palestine, Lord Rothschild is called upon by Moses Gaster. And there's this discussion about Jewish populations in Eastern Europe. And the leaders are talking about the pogroms, about the atrocities that happen in Jewish communities across Europe. And they want to know if the British government provides this declaration, how can we prioritize Jewish communities, and what are the countries that we need to prioritize for Jewish communities to immigrate to Palestine? What are the countries in which we have the worst atrocities done unto Jewish communities? And let's prioritize those. And Lord Rothschild says this: as Palestine was not large enough to include the Jews of the whole world, a preference might be given to the oppressed Jews, notably those of Romania and Russia. I think it's really important that Lord Rothschild wanted to focus on the communities in Romania first and Russia and support them in going back to the Jewish homeland. Ultimately, this meeting was a pivotal moment that helped shape the direction of the Zionist movement during a time of great change. And I want to quote to you from Genius and Anxiety, a book written by Norman Lambrecht, what he said about this meeting and about Mark Sykes. And I quote, "Russia," Sykes continues, "would like to send its Jews to Palestine. Tsarist officials have told him privately that their only concern is that the territory would not be large enough for all the Jews they want to export. The French," he warns, "will kick up a fuss when they hear that the Jews prefer British rule. Perhaps the Zionists could send someone to charm them. James de Rothschild nominates Sokolov, a Polish-born polyglot of refined committee skills. This is the moment that Gaster realizes that he has been cut out of that great game." The meeting ends after 2¼ hours with an agreement on the draft declaration. Based on Weizmann's paper, more than Gaster's, it designates Palestine as the Jewish national home, grants, quote, "full and free right of immigration to Palestine to Jews of other countries," and, quote, "provides a charter for a Jewish development company, and ordains the Hebrew language to be recognized as an inviolable right of the whole Jewish population. Other minorities are not mentioned." End quote. As soon as they leave, Moses Gaster realizes that Weizmann completed a putsch, as it were, and Sokolov would see Picot the next day, assuring him that the Zionists and Jews generally have the greater respect for and trust in France. So a very big change for Moses Gaster. And I want to draw your attention again on this document on the right-hand side, a letter in which Moses Gaster, and I'm conscious of time, I won't be long. Moses Gaster writes to Baron James de Rothschild, and says this. After that meeting, just 2 days after the meeting, he says, "You perhaps are not aware in the first place that for the last 9 or 10 months, it was I, and I alone, unknown to anybody else except Mr. Herbert Samuel, who have conducted the negotiations with Mr. Samuel, Sir Mark Sykes, and with Mr. Picot. They on more than one occasion have visited me in my house, and I have seen the letter at the French embassy." So I think this is, again, a very important letter in which Moses Gaster, and this is supported by other documents as well, in which Moses Gaster claims that he had negotiations with Mark Sykes and Picot and was full aware of the Sykes-Picot agreement. Mark Sykes was a very interesting figure and a very influential British diplomat who, alongside the Manchester group, Manchester Jews, including Marks and Spencer's, one of the Spencer, I think, who had the huge chain, the Marks and Spencer's chain, supported the Zionist leaders. Same as Weizmann. Weizmann was also a chemist and researcher at the University of Manchester, Russian-born Jew, alongside with the Manchester group. Mark Sykes also supported the Zionist movement, and after the war, he was sent to Versailles, to the peace treaty, to attend the negotiations there, and unfortunately, he died during the peace treaty at Versailles in 1919, as he contracted the Spanish flu, which was a widely spread pandemic at the time. He was 39 when he passed away. So this letter is, again, a document suggesting that Moses Gaster was heavily involved and knew about the Mark Sykes and Picot agreement. And finally, I'd like to draw your attention to this document, in which this is a letter. This is talking about a letter from McMahon about the negotiations with the Arab royal family and the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein. And this is from the McMahon correspondence. We need to know that the McMahon correspondence was secret, and after the Russian Revolution in November of 1917, this correspondence was leaked into the Russian press. And Moscow newspapers wrote extensively about the McMahon correspondence, and also at the same time acknowledging that they have actually promised, the British have also promised the Jewish Zionist leaders the Balfour Declaration in 1916. So there was a huge embarrassment for the British government and the Secret Service that this correspondence was leaked and made the headlines in the Russian press. So this is a letter based on a letter from McMahon, and he says this: "At the request of Sir Mark Sykes, I had an interview with General Haddad Pasha, the representative in London of the Sharif Hussein, and his son Faisal. There were 2 other high Arab officers present. Although they had already some inkling from Sir Mark of the new developments in regard to Palestine, they were not at all pleased with the information I gave them that the Jews were to be promised Palestine in consideration of their help in gaining pro-Allied support in the United States. They did not want Jews to go to Palestine, which was an Arab land. But when I explained the importance of the matter, and that the War Cabinet had resolved it, they reluctantly agreed, as they too realized the vital importance of American help. The fact that the much vaunted Arab revolt had been of such small dimensions was not without its effect on their decision." So this is a crucial point, I think. Even the Sharif of Mecca realized that the Arab revolt was not as efficient as it should have been. They undertook to raise no objections and said we could count on the Arab leaders agreeing to the settled British policy. During the interview with T.E. Lawrence in London, T.E. Lawrence is Lawrence of Arabia, and in Paris during the war, and with Faisal and Lawrence during the peace conference, I found Lawrence entirely favorable and Faisal reconciled to the bargain being carried out. The agreement signed by him with Dr. Weizmann about April 1918 bears this out. So again, this just talks about the feelings of the Arab leaders about the Balfour Declaration and about British policy, that they eventually accepted the outcome without pushing back, as it were. Finally, Moses Gaster, as we've seen, was a scholar, a spiritual leader, and a Zionist visionary, and played a crucial role in negotiating and securing the Balfour Declaration for the Jewish people. And his legacy remains today. And I think it's really interesting and commendable to investigate and to dig a bit deeper into the archives and to understand what exactly his contributions was to the declaration. But my claim is that he played a crucial role. And it may be that without Moses Gaster, the Balfour Declaration would have looked very different. And of Moses Gaster, Mircea Eliade spoke very highly and said this, and I end on this with this quote. Eliade said, "It is clear that this love of Gaster for all the tribes of Israel, and in his secret desire to see Jewish spirituality unified, one must seek the explanation for his vivid interest in the Samaritans, the oldest Jewish sect in existence. Dr. Gaster contributed like no one else in deciphering the mystery that surrounded until his time the history of this sect. It is the first profound synthesis of this mysterious Jewish sect which Dr. Gaster knows in the smallest details, and for the explanation of which the old scholar spent 30 years of his life." A very interesting quote by Mircea Eliade about Moses Gaster, whom he spoke about very, very highly and regarded one of the leading figures in the history of religions and Jewish scholarship in Romania. Thank you very much for your time. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions, not only about Moses Gaster, the spiritual leader and scholar, and his work in Romania, but also his activities in the UK and in securing the Balfour Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, very much indeed, for your presentation and for the new documents revealing the magnitude of Moses Gaster's involvement in the highest form of politics. But I would emphasize immediately that this is only the linkage between his scholarship and his role as a leader and as a visionary figure, because already when he was barely 20 years old, he took part in the Berlin Treaty. He pleaded already in 1878 for the definition of that famous and then infamous Romanian-wise article about conferring upon Romanian Jewry the quality of citizenship. And this Gaster was prepared even by his early career as a scholar in Breslau and the science of Judentum in early 1870s for having this linkage between the most profound scholarship concerning what he in 1878 names at the real cause and the ordering element of all the Jewry in the world, which is the Hebrew language, and his later vision while in Mildervale. I would only, and very briefly, just before starting a discussion which would, of course, I hope, involve also, which is splendid for our institute, two of the descendants of this enormously important figure, Moses Gaster. I would only because it really adds to your wonderful explanation. We've unpublished documents from UCL Gaster Papers Archive. The portrait, his very son, Theodor H. Gaster, wrote precisely about the wording of the Balfour, which we can easily coin it as Balfour Gaster Declaration for one moment at least. And also this character, you precisely mentioned this, of frustration. Let's hear his own son, Theodor H. Gaster, the famous historian of religions, of Fraserian legacy. A paradoxical, his son Theodor has drawn perhaps the best portrait, a paradoxical amalgam. He was at once the impulsive, exuberant, generous Romanian and the authoritarian product of the German university. Usually ahead of his contemporaries, he was, alike in his work and his life, always restless and frustrated. He was difficile in committees and teamwork because he had almost invariably seen the wider ramifications and implications of an issue before his colleagues had got to them. His Zionist colleagues found him obstinate and intractable. The fact is, however, that he usually turned out to be more far-sighted than they. He saw, before they did, the snares and pitfalls in the compromise wording of the Balfour Declaration, and rightly, although unpopularly, predicted that it would come, in the end, to form the basis for whittling away Zionist claims and aspirations. And to end this, I would only mention that when he was receiving the most important London people during the peak of the widest empire in history, in his own home in Maida Vale, this Moses Gaster was almost entirely blind. Please, if you would like to have questions for Dr. Samuel Marusca.
Thank you very much for your observation. I think that's very important and relevant, and it speaks to the uncompromising nature of Moses Gaster in negotiating the declaration for the Jewish people. There was a lot of redrafting and redrafting of the declaration, and Moses Gaster didn't like the compromise that was reached by the British government because he thought that the declaration was a failure in a way. And there's an interesting quote, and I'm going to say this in Romanian. Era momentul ca evreii să se târască pe burțile lor și să exprime recunoștință nelimitată pentru o simplă declarație platonică și lipsită de angajament. Suntem doar buni ca hrană pentru tranșee sau ca piese în jocul lor politic. This is talking about the idea that the Jewish community is just a pawn on the chessboard of the great British Empire, and this is just a compromise reached with Zionist leaders because the declaration isn't actually promising anything. It's a simple letter, which is a very strange thing. It was supposed to be it's not even an agreement. It's not that has no judicial or legal power until the Versailles Treaty and later on in 1921. But at that time, it was just a letter addressed to Lord Rothschild by the Foreign Secretary, and no more than that. However, it is the seed that later grew into the Palestine mandate and a British mandate in Palestine, and later on in 1948 led to the state of Israel, of which Chaim Weizmann was the first president. And just to say, mitzvah that you saw in the document. Moses Gaster liked to talk about his home as the Mishpah, which is Toren der Wege, or a high tower, a high place in ancient Palestine, where Jacob and Laban erected a heap of stones in the Old Testament as a sign of the covenant between them. This is from Genesis 31. In Hebrew, it's Mishpah. So that's why we see Mitzpah above his home address in Maida Vale. Thank you. Any questions?
Please. Dear Madam Ruth Rickard or Lucy Gaster, if you would like to address some questions and observation, perhaps on this talk, we'd be very much pleased.
Yes, I just want to thank Samuel for a very, very interesting talk, ranging so widely between the Romanian and the British side of Moses, which, of course, we, as having been born and brought up here in London, at least me, and my father, who was the 12th of the 13 children that Moses had, by the way, he had rather rejected his Jewish heritage and didn't bring us up to know enough about it. So we're learning at a very late stage so much from all you scholars who have suddenly, thank goodness, appeared on the scene. So, I mean, I actually did in 2017 have a look at some of those documents that were in the UCL archive, which happened to, I found a folder of them among my father's papers and was very interested. But trying to disentangle all the different elements of what counted as Zionism here in the UK, let alone across the world, all the different understandings of what it would mean, was well beyond me. And so I'm really grateful for some of this disentangling happening here, and setting it in that much wider political context was really helpful. I'm trying to think of an actual question that I might ask, which I suppose might come down to the character of Moses and why it was that he got into such disputes with people. You know, he had to resign as Chacham because of a quarrel with the Sephardic community here in Britain. And I read his diary about how that meeting in February 1917 ended in tears, as it were, as far as he was concerned. But unfortunately, the note that he said he was going to leave to say what he thought had happened, I never found, and I don't know if he ever wrote it. I mean, can Samuel say a bit more about how much he thinks it was that Moses quarreled with everyone, or was there just a simple fact that other people had the ear of the government more effectively at this time?
Thank you, Lucy, and it's great to see you again, Lucy. Very interesting points that you raised, Lucy, about the meeting in 1917, of that February meeting. As you say, many historians will argue and claim that Moses Gaster was sometimes rigid. I say uncompromising, in that it was not always easy. And this is, of course, something that's reflected in his memoirs and Theodor Herzl's, his son, journals and so on. But he was very respected by the Jewish Zionist organizations and associations. He was extremely respected because of his charisma and his intellectual background. Unlike Chaim Weizmann, for example, who was just a chemist, many will say, Gaster spoke 10 languages and his archive reflects that. The UCL archives cover some 10 languages, which means that you need to be a polymath to understand Gaster fully. I'm only narrowing down on that Zionist material, but he was very respected for that. Also for his uncompromising nature. He gave a talk in Parliament, and one of the MPs said, "I don't know this man, but I wish I would be as convincing and persuasive as he is." He was Romanian. It's just very remarkable how he immersed himself fully in the British culture, and as a result was so respected for this. As you say, the Ramsgate affair unfortunately didn't come out as it should have been. He was also not favored by the French diplomats. The French diplomats thought that he was too conservative, too traditional, and too pushy, whereas the Zionists will say he was simply supporting the Zionist cause. But he was at points rigid and inflexible. As a result, in 1917, in the February meeting, he was cut off and was very, very depressed after that, because he was leading the negotiations for about 3 years. He was also involved in the Sykes-Picot agreement for some 10 months, plus over 10 months. He was then replaced with Chaim Weizmann at the helm of the Zionist Federation, and by Sokolov in the Picot in the negotiations with the French. Picot and Sokolov. So Sokolov continued the negotiations on behalf of the Zionist leaders. Sokolov later secured Vatican support and Italian support for the Balfour Declaration. But Picot made a comment that he thought Moses Gaster was far too conservative, far too traditional, and it was very difficult for Picot to lead and continue negotiations with him. And also another significant point is that they wanted at the time, in 1917, they wanted someone with a Russian background who spoke Russian. Given the revolution and the changes in Russia at the time, the abdication of Tsar Nicholas and so on. So for that reason, Sokolov, they thought, was perhaps the best option, the best man to lead and continue the negotiations, which was very unfair because Sokolov was not, of course, was not aware of all of the latest discussions and all of the progress that Gaster has made on the negotiations. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think that's, every bit of history requires about 10 different interpretations, and having a wide knowledge of all those different languages and all those different cultures and all those different expectations was probably impossible for any one person. So that makes sense. And thank you very much for all your research on this issue.
Please.
Thank you very much, Samuel. I just would like to say that there are so many wide-ranging political pressures at work at this time. I mean, Britain deeply involved in the Great Game around Tibet, for example, at the same kind of time as they're trying to do Great Game things in the Middle East. And they were negotiating with the Arabs, as with the Jews, just to see where their advantage would lie to push Turkey back, I think. I mean, it's quite difficult to get a hang on what was actually going on a large scale. And of course, Gaster was reacting to the Russian pogroms, which had affected a lot of the British Jews, well, and worldwide Jewry, I think. So they really were looking for a homeland. It wasn't just Uganda, of course. There were other places. I think South America came up, didn't it, at one point?
It was Argentina as well, of course.
Yeah, that's right. But, it wasn't clear where would be the best place. And I do know that I can't remember exactly where it is, but I suspect in the memoirs, I'm not sure, because that was a bit of a mishmash of papers put together by Bertha Gaster, and it's a mishmash, in fact. So it's quite difficult to extract clear information from it. And some of the papers are missing, as we know, as Lucy was just saying. After the Balfour Declaration, Moses said he was going to write his viewpoint, but he didn't, or we didn't find it. Is it there? Did you come across that?
I did not. That's a very good point, Ruth. I did not, unfortunately. I have been and reviewed all of the Zionist material in the UCL archive papers, which is about 20-30 boxes of unpublished and uncatalogued material, which is significant. And the UCL archive is currently being catalogued, which is good, but it's not all catalogued at the moment, so I haven't come across that yet. If I will, I'm going to. So as you say, it's good to have different viewpoints, and it's significant to review the Mark Sykes archives, the Foreign Office archive, and the Secret Service archive. That will be very interesting to see. If the Secret Service was involved in the Sykes-Picot agreement and what they made of the leaks of the McMahon correspondence that was leaked. But when it comes to Gaster's later accounts or his own thoughts about the declaration, I haven't come across any significant piece other than his views expressed in future correspondence, in later correspondence with various leaders after the declaration, which is of course in the archives. Very, very interesting point. If I come across it, I will definitely flag it. That will be interesting to see.
I think it would be quite important. If I ever find it, I will try and let you know. But somewhere, I thought he said it did not. The agreement as it became established, I say agreement in inverted commas, was not what he had been negotiating for. I'm almost quoting, I'm sure. Something like that. It was not what he had worked for all those years, what finally became established. And he was very disappointed. And I'm not quite sure how it went, but I think there was the angle that he really wanted to work with the Palestinians. It wasn't that it was going to be, the Zionists would take over and would control. That came later. And I'm also curious how much that might have been the Russian influence, but also later influxes of Russian Jews coming into Palestine. But that's a later story, which may talk about the current situation as well. So it's really, I find it quite painful that he was identified with the Balfour Declaration, or sort of, but that's not actually what he said. But I can't find it, so I don't know where it was that he said that. I mean, would you agree with that, actually? That he wasn't happy with the result. He was pushed out by Weizmann. They quarreled quite badly.
They did.
Weizmann never paid back the debt he owed to Moses. My father tried to get it from him many years later and failed. So, I mean, Moses opened his arms and welcomed Weizmann to Britain, helped him to get nationality, helped him to get a job in Manchester, lent him money, and felt very betrayed by him. He took those things quite personally. He wasn't a rich man, as you may know, and he had many children to support. So there's all kinds of crisscrossing, as well as with the rest of the Zionists. He fell out with them all the time. The British Zionists. So there's quite a lot of difficulty going on, and trying to keep things secret and trying to negotiate and so on. Sorry, I'm a little bit at cross purposes, but perhaps you get the drift.
Thank you, Ruth. I just wanted to caveat what you said, that this isn't what Moses Gaster negotiated or talked about. Whilst he was very dissatisfied with the outcome, I think what he had in mind was more than just a letter addressed to Lord Rothschild, who wasn't even the president of the English Zionist Federation, for example. He wasn't Gaster was the de facto leader of the Zionist movement in Britain. So you would have hoped that the letter at least would have been addressed to someone else, not Lord Rothschild, who was, of course, very influential, very rich, with lots of ties in the British government and a peer in the House of Lords, an inherited peerage, which is nowadays quite rare. But Gaster was hoping for a more legally binding document and for a more robust and a better phrasing of the declaration and a more robust agreement for the Jewish people, rather than simply a letter, because he wasn't, at the time, of course, Britain was losing the war, as I said. It was only in December of 1917 that Britain got hold of Palestine, and Moses Gaster was hoping that this would be much more than just that letter, which of course made it into the Peace Treaty of Versailles and into the conference at Remo later in 1920, the San Remo conference later in 1920. But it wasn't sure in 1917 that the declaration would lead to a Jewish state, which is what he wanted. So whilst this isn't exactly what he was hoping for, this is a compromise. And of course, the wording, we can go through that, was initially talking about the Jewish home, not a home, which is significant. And was, of course, the initial draft was much larger. And he talked about, like, it had like several pages. He talked about religious freedom, about the human rights, about the freedom, about the rights of the Arab and Jewish population, and so on. So it was a much larger document that was condensed to a sentence, basically, that Gaster didn't agree with. But otherwise, his role was significant in securing that declaration and contributed alongside Chaim Weizmann, with whom he had a love-hate relationship, as we say. There's a lot of gossip in their correspondence that I noticed, and it's a delight to read the wording and their language at the time, and including records of their phone conversations. So whilst Gaster wasn't very happy with the wording, I think this is what he talked about, obviously, but it didn't quite turn to be the legally binding document that he hoped for.
And that's very interesting. Thank you for saying that. By the way, had you come across, because it's not really mentioned very much, Weizmann wasn't just a chemist. He ended up working in munitions, and my understanding is
discovered the acetone and made a fortune in the war.
Exactly, yes. And the British government was rather interested. So I think they were quite keen to favor him, as he was a more interesting kind of person for them and their aims, if you like.
And he was a very able communicator and a diplomat, and got along very well with government leaders, including Lord Balfour, Prime Minister David Lloyd George, Mark Sykes Samuel, and many others in the British government. So he was a very able negotiator and cunning, I would say, communicator.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
I would only add that at times we are forgetting really the dimension of this tremendous figure. During all these months and years, 1916, 1917, Gaster wrote very many articles in English and other newspapers. He wrote that famous booklet. He prepared it for print, Birds and Beasts, Romanian Birds and Beasts Stories, which is absolutely wonderful. He corresponded with literally thousands of people, and everything he did while in Mile in 1917 is related to what he did immediately after Breslau and Leipzig in early 1880s in Bucharest, because he started to do by himself and together with Schwarzfeld brothers to buy small portions of lands in Palestine for Romanian and Northern Moldavian Jewry. He started to put in communication people from all walks of life to be able to negotiate within parts of the Romanian government something for the institution of what would have been, would be at a certain moment a more general European, international, global project of a Jewish state, which he understood precisely in terms of history of religions. What we do all know, it really is a mandate of consciousness for all of us to understand the rights and implications, the necessity of having a Jewish state as a result of 2000 years of torments. And from this very perspective, I think the future publication of your book, dear Samuel, would really bring forward, would add to our knowledge, and would interfere with some levels of raising of anti-Semitism in the world, not only in Romania or in UK, as far as I know, and may offer a better description of the very aim of such quasi-mythological figures as Gaster is. Please, our colleagues in Bucharest, within the premises of the Institute, or because we are wandering scholars, by definition, our colleagues in Berlin, Dr. Ionuț Băncilă, or in Milano, Dr. Daniela Dumbrava, perhaps you would like to address some questions to Dr. Marusca? Ionuț? Daniela,
I really Daniela, I really like to thank to Samuel for this very impressive presentation. I was all the time processing information into my mind, but and I was amazed that someone will finally offer time for research concerning the pre-movement, pre-events to the formation of the Israel state. I'm wondering if it is possible. I don't know if it will be very if you were concentrated on that, but I'm wondering today, the movement, Zionist movement, it's almost belonging to the, spiritually speaking, to the Lubavitch community, Shabbat, in all over the world. And I'm wondering how all these efforts of Gaster movement and Gaster efforts could be reflected to the actual and present image of the Zionist movement, and mainly the spiritual part of the Zionist movement, because they all the time are emphasizing the idea of Messiah. And I'm wondering if there are some spiritual elements which might occur from his efforts to establish a Jewish state in Palestine, if there are some references concerning the religious and spiritual Judaic elements which might be connected with the Zionist movement at the initial point.
It's a very interesting question. Thank you.
It's a very interesting question.
Oh,
thank you.
I think there's an echo.
I think there's an echo.
Oh, that's better. Thank you. Very interesting. So the question is, how have Gaster's views impacted on the modern Zionist movement, including in contemporary Zionist circles? I would say, first of all, And I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I think first of all, Zionism is a misconstrued term in contemporary history and politics. So I think his view of Zionism helps clarify a little bit of that in contemporary Zionist views. That basically agrees that the state of Israel should exist. There are differences and disagreements about the government structures. Some Zionists are more religious, others are more secular. Today, there is talk about Zionist left. I would say also that Gaster's influence is on the Reformed communities and the Sephardic communities, and this is significant, especially as Ruth and Lucy will no doubt know, that his influence in East London, in the Eastern London communities, and synagogues was significant, and many of the Sephardic and the Reformed Jewish communities as well, and synagogues here in London, are interested in Gaster's work because everything about the Balfour Declaration was Ashkenazi rather than Sephardic. So looking at the Balfour
As he
Declaration,
was actually, as he was an Ashkenazi Jew from
Yes.
18th century family in Bucharest, with Russian from his mother and Polish Austrian from his father descendants.
Exactly, and he was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first Ashkenazi Jew to be chief rabbi of the Sephardic community. But it's significant that he pastored this community, and this spirit of the Sephardic views, I think, is significant even today, especially in the Reformed Jewish circles. As to what his particular theological views on Zionism itself, I think Ruth and Lucy may be better positioned, better placed to talk to the impact that of Gaster's works on spiritual Zionism and perhaps the Messianic movement. As far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any links to the Messianic movement, but I'm keen to know if Lucy and Ruth have thoughts.
I think I've just suddenly realized you're probably referring to an article I found, and I put a question up on the Moses Gaster Facebook page, but no Romanian speakers actually responded and told me what it really said. So I later heard some information that, yes, very strangely, his father and Moses, when he was young, so they're still in Bucharest, joined the Masons. There was a Masons set. I don't know quite how it works, but they set up something and they joined it. And I don't really know why or what the benefit was. And so there was a connection, but beyond that, I can't really say. It was kind of curious to me at the time. If you want further information, I might have it, but I'm not sure. Anybody else know? Any other ideas there?
I should just quickly add that I have no idea about any of this, certainly not the influence or the connections with present-day so-called Zionism. And unfortunately, I've got to go. So I'd like to thank everyone for allowing us to speak. And good luck with your wonderful researches. Most interesting. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We were honored.
Thank you very much.
I do think there will be any other occasion to discuss Samuel Marusca's unpublished manuscripts and analysis on Gaster archive, Gaster papers, especially in UCL. As we are starting a multi-annual project on the religious history of Romania, and Ionuț Băncilă and I were organizing next year in the World Congress for History of Religions in Krakow, which will be the 23rd World Congress for History of Religions in the history of 1,025 years of congresses for history of religions. Two panels, which both are may be related to your work. So this is an open invitation to join us in Krakow next August, and also perhaps to have further communication on these very topics before and after the publication of your Palgrave Macmillan book. Perhaps I would, in terms of organizing knowledge, I would like to ask you how many unpublished documents you do think it would be good to publish in the near future from this very huge archive.
There are so many.
There are so many
hard to say. There are about 20 plus boxes of unpublished, many of them unpublished manuscripts, ranging from slips of paper to telegrams, like really urgent things about helping an orphanage in Palestine or helping this small community or a school in Palestine or in Romania, from a lot of correspondence with Romanian scholars. We're talking about tens of thousands of letters that he kept, in addition to
a decent amount.
That's right. In addition to press cuttings, old manuscripts, amulets. He was a collector, an avid collector of amulets as well, as we know. And
to say nothing about all Samaritan things.
Exactly. And they range from, you know, scribs on a piece of paper in I don't know, German or English or Romanian or Hebrew to press cuttings. So I think maybe a dozen or so documents, but I will probably publish a dozen or so documents. And just to go back to your first book, in my book, that's right.
Book, yes.
That's right. And to go back to your first question, yes.
Just to thank Ruth Rickard for her presence. You will recognize immediately. I placed it in my office. This is a typewriter you published on your excellent Facebook Gaster page. That typewriter with the letters of another alphabet in order to write that, especially that 1925 book on the Samaritans. Perhaps Ionuț Băncilă, Bogdan Tătaru Cazaban, the previous director of our institute and the specialist, a scholar famous in Romania and a comparative scholar of monotheisms. Perhaps you would like to have a question or to engage in a dialogue with Samuel or with all our assistants.
Just to thank Dr. Samuel Marusca, if you hear me.
Yeah. We can hear now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you're breaking up.
In the Moses Gaster room here at the Institute for the History of Religions. And it is not your main subject of research, but I wonder if you have details about the engagement of Professor Louis Massignon in the discussion around the Balfour Declaration, because he took part in the negotiations from the French side.
That's right. I could barely make up, with apologies. I think you were breaking up there. But you were mentioning Massimilian. I haven't come across. He was indeed involved in the negotiations, but I haven't come across his name in the Moses Gaster's archive. It may be that he spoke to Moses Gaster, or indeed Pico, of course, Pico and Sokolov. So it may be that he engaged later on with Sokolov, but so far I haven't come across any of his correspondence or work in relation to the Gaster's papers.
So Bogdan Tataru-Kazaban asked about some possible involvement of Louis Massignon, and there were some collection problems, and you were just telling us that you didn't discover actually documents from Massignon Gaster correspondence, or
No, I haven't, as I said, but I'm sure there will be, because I want to triangulate a lot of this information with other sources and other archives, including from Jerusalem, from, like I said, the Foreign Office, Mark Sykes archives, and so on. And it may be that we can talk about Massimilian as well. But so far, I haven't come across his any relations or any work in conjunction with Gaster involvement.
Just a little question. Someone, do you still have access to the Rothschild archive? Because I think it's very important for the issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. We do have access to some of the Rothschild archive. That's right. I wanted to interview Lord Rothschild. Unfortunately, before he passed away, I didn't get the chance to do that. But I intend to speak to the Rothschild family as well.
That would be wonderful. That would be great. Yeah, absolutely. Because in many interviews, the Lord Rothschild mentioned this part of their family history, which is crucial. Yeah.
any other questions?
So, I would be interested in the
Please.
heritage of the Wissenschaft des Judentums in Gaster's method, Gaster's approach to history, to folklore. So that will be my question. Is there any research? So I'm not aware of much of it.
Sorry, can you say that again, please?
The heritage of Wissenschaft des Judentums, this direction of research he was pursued in Breslau.
I don't know, Samuel, if you heard him.
Of course,
from
of course.
Yes.
It is. I haven't studied his work on folklore for this research, which is more around his Zionist activities, but it is quite well known, and it's, I think, the idea that he promotes this idea that folk tales in Jewish history are the link between are more prevalent in Eastern European literature than we thought initially. So it's the medieval folk tales that come up in Romanian folk tales that is significant. And he traces a lot of contemporary Romanian folk tales to previous medieval Jewish folk tales, which is very significant, I thought, including stories like the three swans that are turned into maidens, for example, including the roots and the background to the Hansel and Gretel story, and many other stories. Some of these are also discussed in Romanian birds and bees stories and come up in those stories as well. So I think this is the main one of the main arguments from Gaster, that we need to rediscover medieval Jewish history and medieval Jewish folk tales, because they do provide the link between so many Eastern European folk tales and folklore, including Bulgarian, Romanian, Hungarian, and Polish. Do you have any thoughts, Eugen, on this?
Yes, I know there are some recent articles. I mean, in the last decade or so, on the specific Weltanschauung of Wissenschaft des Judentums, specifically for Gaster's, of course, first years after Breslau in Bucharest, the 5 years left in Bucharest, 1885, and for the method of encouraging all types of Aufklärung in post-Mendelssohnian way in doing comparative study. Actually, if you remember the episodes with Ascoli and Friedrich Max Müller in Oxford, you will immediately see your notes that he switched from Wissenschaft des Judentums to comparative religion. Actually, he did properly comparative religion, and he did it for the first time as the first Jew invited that Ilchester Lectures moment, 1885, to deliver lectures at the University of Oxford. He was very proud of it, and he was very much right in this respect. And he continued to do more comparative religion or comparative history of religions, as in the continental tradition of our studies, while he embarked upon studying, for instance, what he called, and all the others, gypsy lore, and his involvement as the president for a while of the Gypsy Lore Society of Britain. So there are so many avenues of research, especially because there are unpublished documents, and there are so many differences between all this landscape of Gaster's mind, that I do hope we will be able to discuss it further and further more in the years to come, within, why not, the premises of the Institute for the History of Religions of the Romanian Academy. I would like to thank you once again, all of you, and specifically for the granddaughters of Moses Gasters, who is one of the founding fathers of the study of religions in Europe. I would like to salute from Gaster office in Bucharest the two tails of Gaster's cats. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I have to leave. Somebody has just arrived at my door. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you
time.
so much.
Thank you.